The scent of pine and snow always reminded Cassandra Cassie White of home. Nestled on the outskirts of Montpelier, Vermont, the small two-bedroom house she grew up in bore the marks of love and labor, its paint faded, but its soul intact. Cassie's mother died during childbirth, leaving her father, Martin White, a retired train conductor with a limp and a heart full of stories, to raise her alone. Despite the simplicity of their lives, Martin never failed to make Cassie feel like the center of the universe. She was a bright child, curious, compassionate, and fiercely driven. Her dream wasn't grand fame or fortune, it was stability. A house filled with laughter. Children with muddy boots. A husband who came home for dinner. At 30, now working as a logistics coordinator for a medium-sized supply firm, she believed her time would come, if not today, then tomorrow. She just didn't expect her tomorrow would begin in a conference room in Chicago. The National Freight Optimization Summit was nothing like the quiet world Cassie had known. The lights were brighter, the pace faster, and the suits far more expensive. Cassie, dressed in a navy skirt and an oversized cream cardigan her father insisted made her look trustworthy, arrived early with a tablet full of data models and a nervous heart. It was her first out-of-state presentation, and she planned to make every minute count. She was scribbling last-minute notes in the back corner of a breakout room when a voice, confident, deep, and just slightly amused, interrupted her thoughts. "I hope those calculations aren't about to replace my entire fleet." Turning, Cassie came face to face with Jordan Hale, the charismatic co-founder of HaleTech Transport, known in the industry for his rapid expansion and innovative trucking solutions. He had piercing hazel eyes, a gold watch worth more than her apartment, and a smile that disarmed her instantly. Their handshake lingered longer than necessary. Jordan found something disarming in Cassie's simplicity. She wasn't dazzled by his tailored suit or the accolades that trailed his name like a comet's tail. She talked to him like he was just another attendee, not the keynote speaker. They sat beside each other during the next panel and exchanged insights, hers grounded in hard numbers, his in scalable vision. When the lunch break came, he insisted she join him at his table, brushing off the polished executives swarming around him. That evening, they walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, coffee cups in hand, and Cassie told him about her father, the train ride she used to take as a child, and how her dream wasn't to dominate the industry, but to build a life she wouldn't have to run away from. Jordan, despite all his success, felt strangely grounded by her honesty. In a city of ambition, Cassie White stood out, not because she reached higher, but because she reached deeper. And something in Jordan shifted that night. Jordan Hale was a man carved from ambition and polished with legacy. Born into affluence in Seattle, he was the eldest son of Richard and Victoria Hale, founders of the multi-generational Hale shipping dynasty. But Jordan didn't just inherit privilege, he expanded it. When his father passed suddenly in a plane accident 10 years prior, Jordan, just 25, left Stanford's MBA program and took control of HaleTech, steering the company through brutal competitors and a collapsing freight economy. Where others hesitated, Jordan innovated, automated fleets, green energy logistics, and cross-border expansion. Despite his sharp mind and sharper instincts, he was constantly under pressure from his controlling mother, Victoria, who believed every decision should serve the Hale name. Jordan's relationship with his younger brother, Vincent, a quieter and more philanthropic soul, had soured over time due to Vincent's disinterest in corporate warfare. Jordan wore his success like armor, charming on the outside, but perpetually at war within. Yet beneath Jordan's CEO image was a man haunted by failures he refused to admit aloud. His past relationships had all imploded under the weight of distrust and disloyalty. The most recent, Vanessa Cruz, a dazzling fashion buyer with a vicious temper, ended with shattered glass and whispered threats. He never spoke of Vanessa again, burying the chaos in silence. Most women either idolized him or tried to use him, and over time, he stopped opening doors to anyone. But Cassie White was different. She wasn't interested in flashing cameras or industry galas. Her laugh was unfiltered, her opinions unapologetic, and her heart painfully honest. After that first evening by the Riverwalk, Jordan couldn't stop thinking about her. He sent her an email the next morning titled Riverwalk Reflections, and soon after, their daily chats turned into weekly video calls, then weekends in Vermont. He met her father, Martin, and even helped fix their broken fence, a task he found strangely fulfilling. 6 months after their first meeting, Jordan planned something that shocked even his inner circle. He chartered a private boat on Lake Ontario and, under the cascading lights of a Niagara night, dropped to one knee. Cassie gasped as he pulled out a diamond ring, not oversized, not loud, but perfect in its elegance. "I don't need someone who dazzles the world," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "I need someone who grounds me when it spins." Cassie, overwhelmed and trembling, said yes. The proposal photo went viral after a tourist uploaded it to TikTok, and overnight, Cassie became the logistics girl who stole the billionaire's heart. Victoria Hale was livid. She had expected her son to marry someone from their circles, someone groomed, poised, controllable. Instead, Jordan had chosen a woman with muddy sneakers, mismatched earrings, and a heart that refused to bend. The Hale dynasty had no idea how much the decision would alter every chapter yet to come. The wedding was nothing short of a spectacle, an elegant collision between old wealth and humble roots. Napa Valley's crimson hills stretched wide beneath a golden autumn sky, hosting a celebration that drew both the elite and the ordinary. Jordan had spared no expense. String quartets floated through the vineyards, tables sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and renowned chefs served delicacies flown in from France. Yet at the center of the grandeur stood Cassie in a custom silk gown, her eyes locked on Jordan's as though nothing else existed. Her best friend, Heather Stone, a pediatric nurse with fierce loyalty and a wry sense of humor, stood beside her as maid of honor. On Jordan's side, his assistant Amir Blake, a sharp, observant man who knew the undercurrents of the Hale empire better than anyone, kept watch. Guests whispered about the pairing, the small-town girl and the empire prince, but Cassie paid no mind. She believed love could silence any storm. She hadn't yet met the hurricane. Victoria Hale arrived in a fitted charcoal gown, no smile, no sentiment. Her disdain wasn't spoken, it was embroidered into every glance, every pause, every clipped congratulation. She shook Cassie's hand but didn't hug her, whispering only, "Let's hope you can keep up." From that moment, the tension was undeniable. Throughout the reception, Victoria clung to family allies, retired board members, shareholders, women from country clubs whose children she once tried to match with Jordan. Her face barely moved when the couple danced under cascading fairy lights. But beneath her cold gaze, her mind worked like a strategist. She didn't see Cassie as a threat, she saw her as a mistake, one that would collapse under pressure. Meanwhile, Cassie noticed something else, the slight panic in Jordan's eyes when an unfamiliar woman appeared briefly by the back hedge, tall, raven-haired, with unmistakable confidence. She vanished before Cassie could ask. But the chill that accompanied her presence lingered like the smell of smoke after a quiet fire. After the wedding, Cassie and Jordan flew to the Amalfi Coast for their honeymoon, but the joy was uneven. While Jordan tried to be present, booking private boat rides, ordering her favorite desserts, there were moments where he drifted, lost in thought, his phone constantly buzzing. Cassie, ever intuitive, didn't press him, but she felt it, a crack in the glass. One night, while he slept, she scrolled through his messages and saw nothing suspicious, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had returned. When they got back to Seattle, a bouquet awaited them at their penthouse, 12 blood-red roses with a note that read, "Some stories don't end with a vow." Jordan turned pale when he saw it. Cassie asked who it was from. He shrugged, forced a smile, and said, "Probably a jealous ex, ignore it." But even as he spoke, the shadows in his eyes deepened, and a name echoed in his mind like a curse he hoped he'd buried, Vanessa. In the high-gloss world of fashion expos and luxury networking, Vanessa Cruz was a name whispered with equal parts admiration and fear. Born to Cuban immigrants in Miami, Vanessa had carved her way up the ladder through sheer charm, manipulation, and a ruthless disregard for boundaries. She wasn't just stunning, she was unforgettable. Tall, caramel-toned, with eyes the color of bitter espresso, Vanessa knew exactly how to position herself as both muse and mastermind. At 29, she was a prominent fashion buyer for one of the largest retail empires in the U.S., but beneath her success was a venomous obsession, Jordan Hale. They had met 3 years earlier at a fashion tech summit in New York. Their relationship burned fast and violently, expensive gifts, exotic travels, intense passion, and explosive fights. She had loved Jordan, but she never trusted him. When he ended things without warning, Vanessa didn't cry. She waited. And plotted. Because for Vanessa, unfinished business always demanded a finale. The New York Logistics and Lifestyle Gala was Cassie's first major public appearance as Jordan's wife. Dressed in a soft ivory gown, Cassie dazzled not because of opulence, but because of the grace she wore like second skin. She smiled warmly, greeted guests with genuine interest, and spoke eloquently about supply chain sustainability on the panel, earning admiration from Jordan's business allies. But from across the room, Vanessa watched her like a panther in a silk dress, sipping a martini as she leaned against a marble column. Her entrance was timed to perfection. Just as Jordan was taking a press photo, she stepped into frame with an elegant "Jordan, darling, still allergic to commitment?" Jordan froze. The cameras clicked. Cassie turned, confused, as the crowd began whispering. Vanessa extended a hand to Cassie, her smile predatory. "You must be the wife." "I'm Vanessa Cruz, former fiancée, well, almost." Cassie's heart stuttered. Jordan looked like he wanted to vanish. Vanessa had arrived, and she wasn't leaving quietly. Later that night, Cassie confronted Jordan in their penthouse suite. "She said you were engaged," she demanded, voice low but cutting. Jordan tried to explain, "We weren't official, it was complicated, I ended it a long time ago," but Cassie saw through the cracks. She realized there was a history he hadn't disclosed. A history that now had legs and heels and perfume and was publicly reclaiming a seat at their table. The next day, Vanessa sent Cassie a bouquet of orchids with a handwritten note, "I always finish what I start." Cassie, shaken but composed, didn't show the note to Jordan. Instead, she tucked it into her journal and wrote beneath it, "If she wants a war, I hope she's prepared for peace to walk away first." But Vanessa wasn't aiming for war, not yet. She was aiming for the long game. She'd worm her way back into Jordan's world, starting with the one thing Cassie didn't see coming, friendship. It began with a vase of white roses on Cassie's desk, no card, no signature. Just elegant, fragrant, and unsettling. She assumed they were from Jordan and texted him a thank you, to which he replied, "What roses?" The unease nestled quietly at first, but over the next few days, Vanessa became unusually present. She showed up at Hale-Tech headquarters, laughing in the hallways with Jordan's executives, casually offering brand consultancy ideas to his logistics division, and charming the interns with her effortless glamour. To Cassie's surprise, Vanessa even requested to have lunch together one afternoon. Over Cobb salads at a rooftop cafe, Vanessa was warm, friendly, and even vulnerable. "I've been through therapy since Jordan and I ended," she said softly. "I just want peace, Cassie. I want to support his happiness, even if it's with someone else." Cassie wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe that people changed. But as she nodded politely, she missed the smirk Vanessa gave the waiter behind her back. That evening, Cassie discovered a single dangling earring wedged between the passenger seat and center console of Jordan's car. It was unmistakably Vanessa's, black opal, custom design, the exact kind she wore at the gala. Her stomach tightened. She told herself it meant nothing. Maybe Vanessa dropped it when Jordan gave her a ride. Maybe she was being paranoid. But the timing, the roses, the sudden camaraderie, all felt off. She placed the earring in a drawer without mentioning it. Meanwhile, Jordan's demeanor toward Cassie grew subtly distant. He was still kind, still attentive in public, but his texts had become shorter, and their conversations lost warmth. He claimed stress from expanding operations into Canada, and Cassie tried to be understanding. But something else clawed at her gut, something colder than mistrust. That night, while Jordan was out late finalizing freight contracts, Cassie sat on the balcony and stared at the stars, wondering if love always dimmed this quietly, or if hers was simply being snuffed out by design. What Cassie didn't know was that someone had tried to warn her. Vincent Hale, Jordan's younger brother, had noticed Vanessa's sudden re-entry and didn't trust her intentions. Vincent had always kept his distance from family drama, preferring to run the philanthropic arm of HaleTech, but he had a sharp eye for deception. He invited Cassie to brunch under the pretense of discussing a sustainability partnership. Over pastries and pressed juice, he leaned forward and said, "Vanessa's dangerous. Don't let her play innocent. I've seen her do worse for less." Cassie, startled by his candor, hesitated to believe him. After all, why now? Why had he never spoken to her like this before? Still, his word stayed with her. Meanwhile, Vanessa began leaving subtle traces of her presence around, half-used lip gloss in the guest bathroom, her perfume lingering in Jordan's office, even a copy of The Art of War casually left on the living room shelf. She wasn't hiding. She was staking ground. And Cassie had just begun to realize she was in the middle of a slow-moving siege. The days turned into weeks, and the distance between Cassie and Jordan grew like an invisible canyon, vast and filled with silence. Jordan began working late, claiming to be closing international deals, but when Cassie once surprised him at the office with dinner, his assistant Amir awkwardly informed her that Jordan had left over an hour ago. Confused and hurt, Cassie drove around for half an hour before she spotted Jordan's car parked in front of Bar Salerno, an upscale restaurant known for private booths and discretion. From across the street, Cassie saw a silhouette with cascading black hair seated across from him, Vanessa. The next morning, Jordan said nothing. Cassie didn't bring it up either, choosing instead to observe. Jordan became increasingly guarded. He changed his passcode, deleted his call logs, and spent more time in the gym than in their bed. Love, Cassie realized, didn't always end with shouting or cheating. Sometimes, it just quietly transferred addresses. Meanwhile, Heather Stone, Cassie's childhood best friend, was growing restless. As a pediatric nurse, Heather was used to seeing signs, physical and emotional, and Cassie's exhaustion didn't sit right with her. Cassie hadn't smiled genuinely in days. She was distracted, always checking her phone, and wore her sadness like oversized clothing. Heather decided to take matters into her own hands. One afternoon, while Cassie was at a prenatal wellness class, Heather followed Jordan from HaleTech discreetly. Her heart sank as she watched him meet Vanessa again, this time at a waterfront condo. They weren't affectionate in public, but the body language told stories, Jordan touching the small of Vanessa's back, Vanessa leaning in close as if sealing whispered promises. Heather snapped pictures discreetly. She debated sending them to Cassie immediately, but something told her it needed to be more than just images. It needed to be undeniable. She began watching Jordan's patterns more closely, hoping she was wrong, but bracing herself in case she wasn't. As all this unfolded, Cassie began experiencing sudden fatigue and dizzy spells. One afternoon, while preparing dinner, she collapsed briefly in the kitchen. Panicked but embarrassed, she told no one and chalked it up to overwork. But the next day, at her doctor's appointment with Dr. Phoebe Lennox, her blood pressure was abnormally low, and Phoebe advised her to rest and avoid stress. Cassie nodded, trying to stay calm, but the anxiety churned in her chest like a whirlpool. Jordan didn't show up for the appointment, even though he had promised to. Later that night, when he walked in well past midnight, his shirt slightly wrinkled and a faint perfume she didn't wear lingering on his collar, Cassie stood in the hallway holding the framed ultrasound photo she had planned to give him. She wanted to tell him she was pregnant. Instead, she tucked the photo back into the drawer and said only, "You're late." Jordan responded with a shrug. "It's work. It never ends." But somewhere in her, something had. Cassie sat alone in the dim nursery room that she had secretly started setting up weeks ago, running her fingers along the edge of the wooden cradle she'd ordered online. She had envisioned surprising Jordan with the news by decorating the room with little clues, soft baby shoes, a framed quote about fatherhood, and the ultrasound image nestled in a tiny envelope. But every day that passed, Jordan drifted further into another world. A world Cassie wasn't invited into. His calls were shorter, his nights were longer, and their weekends, once filled with slow breakfasts and movie marathons, had become silent voids where only the television spoke. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a breakup. It was simply the quiet death of closeness. Cassie hadn't told a soul about the pregnancy, not even Heather. Something about it felt too fragile, too sacred to speak into a world already crumbling under the weight of betrayal she wasn't ready to admit. One rainy afternoon, Cassie finally reached her breaking point. She walked into Jordan's home office with a simple request: "Can we talk?" He barely looked up from his laptop. She sat across from him, trying to explain how she felt. "You're slipping away from me, Jordan. I don't even recognize who you are anymore." His response was cold and calculated. "You're being dramatic. I'm doing everything I can to keep this business afloat, and you're choosing to be insecure over things that don't exist." That was the moment Cassie saw it. Not just the emotional distance, but the intentional deflection. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He was trying to make her doubt herself. And the final blow came when Vanessa accidentally dropped by with Thai takeout, claiming she thought Jordan would still be at the office. Jordan acted surprised, too surprised. Cassie simply stood up and walked out. But not before she looked Vanessa in the eye and whispered, "You don't have to steal what was already discarded." The next day, Vanessa confronted Jordan with manufactured tears in her eyes. "Cassie cornered me. She accused me of trying to steal you. I was scared, Jordan. I think she needs help." She dabbed at the corners of her eyes, twisting the story like a seasoned actress. Jordan, exhausted and guilt-ridden, didn't even ask Cassie her side. He believed Vanessa without question. That night, when Cassie returned home, she found Jordan waiting at the dining table. "You need to stop lashing out at Vanessa," he said coldly. "She's not your enemy. Your insecurity is." Cassie stood frozen. In all her pain, she never imagined he'd choose someone else's word over hers so effortlessly. That night, she lay awake, one hand cradling her stomach. She still hadn't told him she was pregnant. Not because she was afraid, but because she had realized something even more devastating: he didn't deserve to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Cassie sat across from Dr. Phoebe Lennox, her longtime OB/GYN and one of the few professionals she trusted entirely. The private clinic smelled faintly of eucalyptus, calming in a way Cassie desperately needed. She clutched the ultrasound image as if it were a secret letter from the universe, proof that something beautiful could still exist amid the wreckage. 12 weeks along, Dr. Lennox said with a soft smile. "The baby's healthy, heartbeat is strong. But I have to stress this: your stress levels, Cassie, they're dangerously high. If things don't change, there could be complications." Cassie nodded slowly, pressing the photo to her chest. She wanted to cry, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in weeks, someone was seeing her, not dismissing her. She confessed everything to Dr. Lennox: Jordan's absence, Vanessa's manipulation, her own doubts. Phoebe listened in silence, then gently offered, "You don't owe anyone your peace, Cassie. Protect it. Especially now." That weekend, Martin White, Cassie's widowed father, made a surprise visit to Seattle. The moment Cassie opened the door, she nearly collapsed into his arms. She had been holding herself together for so long that the comfort of her father's embrace cracked the dam she'd built inside her. They sat on the porch, sharing coffee and silence before Martin finally asked, "Are you happy, Pumpkin?" The question landed like a thunderclap. She stared at the skyline and whispered, "I don't think he loves me anymore." Martin's face tightened, not with anger, but with grief. He had raised her to believe in love, to believe in building instead of breaking. But now he saw the fatigue behind her smile and the tremble in her fingers. He didn't pressure her for answers. He simply unpacked his suitcase and said, "I'll stay a while." Having him nearby was a balm, a rare moment of safety. But Cassie still kept the pregnancy to herself. Not even Martin knew. Not yet. 2 days later, while Cassie was at a prenatal yoga session, Vanessa Cruz showed up uninvited, this time with a suitcase. The pipe in my condo burst, she explained sweetly to Jordan, standing in their penthouse entryway like she already belonged. It's chaos. Plumbers, insurance, the whole thing. I just need a few nights. I knew you'd understand. Jordan, as usual, made no effort to check with Cassie before agreeing. By the time Cassie returned home, Vanessa had already moved into the guest suite, her designer toiletries neatly aligned in the bathroom, her silk robe hanging on the bedroom door. Cassie stared at her in stunned silence, heart-pounding. You should have asked me, she said to Jordan later. He waved her off, muttering something about emergencies and being a decent human being. But Cassie knew better. Vanessa's intrusion wasn't random, it was rehearsed. And in that moment, Cassie made a vow to herself, if the world around her refused to protect her, then she'd protect herself, and her child, with everything she had. Cassie's world had shifted into a dangerous masquerade, and every corner of her home now echoed with tension. Vanessa moved through the penthouse like it was hers, preparing exotic teas, wearing silk loungewear, and brushing past Cassie with rehearsed nonchalance. At first, Cassie tried to ignore her, but the invasion was suffocating. Jordan became harder to read, warm one moment, dismissive the next. His justifications always sounded noble, always logical. She's going through a crisis, he'd say. She has no one else. But Cassie noticed the way he lingered in conversation with Vanessa, how his smile was real when directed at her. One night, Cassie awoke at 2 a.m. and found their bedroom empty. Jordan's phone was gone. She wandered down the hall in silence, passing Vanessa's closed door, and paused. Laughter. Low, intimate laughter drifted from behind the door. Cassie didn't knock. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, hand on her belly, wondering how a man could lie with so much ease. Determined to protect herself and her unborn child, Cassie reached out to Heather, this time not as a friend but as a silent investigator. Heather, already suspicious, promised to dig deeper and warned Cassie to document everything. That evening, while Jordan was at a supposed executive strategy retreat, Heather followed him. He wasn't in a boardroom. He wasn't in a hotel ballroom. He was at the Grand Cypress Resort, seated with Vanessa by a poolside cabana, their heads close, her fingers grazing his wrist. Heather took dozens of photos. As she zoomed in, she captured Jordan's hand resting on Vanessa's thigh, his expression relaxed, even joyful. Later that night, Heather met Cassie behind a church cafe with the evidence. Cassie looked through the photos in silence, one by one, her breathing shallow. No denial. No questions. Just the final click of truth echoing through her like a loaded gun. She closed the phone, nodded once, and whispered, "Now I know what I'm dealing with." Cassie didn't react with a fight. She didn't storm out or confront Jordan immediately. Instead, she moved quietly, canceling joint credit cards, changing account passwords, and secretly moving valuables into storage under Heather's name. She began consulting with Amir Blake, Jordan's assistant, who had always treated her with quiet respect. Amir, seeing the shifts around Jordan, suspected something was wrong but stayed silent until Cassie finally asked him point-blank, "Has there been anyone else?" Amir hesitated before replying, "He's been reckless, Mrs. Hale. I've had to cover a lot." Cassie thanked him and returned home that night with a plan. She no longer felt bound by hope. Her loyalty had transformed into armor. She stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, eyes firm, jaw clenched. Vanessa wasn't just trying to steal her husband, she was trying to erase her entirely. But Cassie wasn't going to be erased. Not now. Not ever. A storm was coming. But this time, she would decide who drowned. Victoria Hale, Jordan's mother, had always been a woman of influence, cold, meticulous, and driven by legacy more than love. She had never approved of Cassie, whom she considered a temporary phase in her son's life. But recently, Victoria's interest in Cassie had shifted from passive distaste to calculated removal. She invited Vanessa for brunch at her estate, a sprawling colonial mansion built into the hills of Mercer Island. Over lemon scones and fine china, Victoria leaned forward and whispered, "My son has always been impressionable. What he needs isn't just a partner. He needs a brand beside him. You understand that, don't you, Vanessa?" Vanessa sipped her mimosa with a smirk. "I do, Mrs. Hale. More than you know." What started as a social call turned into a covert alliance. Victoria offered Vanessa a board position on one of the Hale subsidiary companies, an unofficial endorsement. In return, Vanessa agreed to restore Jordan's focus. The plan wasn't just about love. It was about control. Meanwhile, Vincent Hale, the more morally grounded younger brother, was growing suspicious of the sudden shift in family dynamics. He noticed Vanessa's name appearing in board emails, witnessed her becoming a fixture at social gatherings, and overheard hushed phone calls between her and their mother. When he confronted Victoria, she dismissed him with a chilling warning, "Stay out of matters you don't understand. You've always been too soft for this family." But Vincent couldn't ignore the gut feeling that something sinister was in motion. During a Hale-Tech charity gala, he watched Vanessa give a speech about brand reinvention while Jordan stood proudly beside her. Cassie, noticeably absent, had supposedly opted for rest. In truth, she hadn't even been invited. That night, Vincent visited Cassie and told her everything: his mother's involvement, the unofficial alliance, and Vanessa's new influence. Cassie listened without flinching. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. She now knew the chessboard. And she knew exactly which queens had to fall. Back at the penthouse, Vanessa's behavior escalated. She began hosting wellness brunches in Cassie's home, inviting influencers and mutual friends while subtly painting Cassie as fragile, emotional, and unwell. She'd say things like, "Cassie's resting today, she's been having a hard time managing her emotions lately," and smile sweetly while sipping herbal tea. Jordan, blinded by the praise Vanessa was receiving for keeping the brand intact, echoed her concerns in private. "Cassie, I think you should talk to someone. People are beginning to notice." The gaslighting was suffocating. Yet Cassie said nothing, choosing instead to play the quiet observer. But the moment Vanessa found out she was pregnant, everything changed. Cassie overheard her on the phone that night, whispering furiously, "You didn't tell me she was pregnant. If she gives birth, that baby becomes leverage." The voice on the other end was unmistakable, Victoria's. Cassie stepped back from the door, pulse racing. Now she wasn't just protecting herself. She was protecting a life they were already plotting against. The tension in the Hale penthouse had reached a suffocating crescendo. Cassie could barely breathe without feeling eyes on her, especially Vanessa's, who now strutted through the home with calculated grace, always smiling, always venomous beneath the surface. Jordan had become a stranger. He no longer asked how Cassie was feeling, didn't notice when she skipped meals, and barely acknowledged her quiet moments of pain. His temper, once rare and subdued, had begun to flare unpredictably, snapping over trivial things like misplaced keys or the messy state of their kitchen. Cassie kept her hands on her belly as though shielding her unborn child from his rising agitation. Vanessa fed Jordan's frustration with manipulative whispers, twisting every honest moment from Cassie into something spiteful. "She's distant because she's hiding something," Vanessa would say. "She's playing the victim card." And Jordan, too wrapped in his ego and the illusion of control, believed her. But Cassie was done absorbing the storm. She was about to unleash one. On a particularly cold evening, Cassie found Jordan on the balcony, sipping whiskey as the wind howled. She hadn't planned on speaking, but when she saw Vanessa's robe hanging on the patio chair beside him, something broke. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" she asked. No tears, no yelling. Just raw honesty. Jordan looked at her, face impassive, and said, "You've been distant, Cassie. You pushed me away." She blinked, stunned. "I'm pregnant," she said finally, her voice trembling, not from fear, but from the heartbreak of having to say those words to someone who should have cared. Jordan froze. "What?" he breathed, but not with joy. Not with awe. With disbelief. as if the idea of Cassie bearing his child was a threat, not a blessing. Before she could say more, Vanessa entered, mid-conversation, and Cassie turned to leave. But Vanessa blocked her path. "You always ruin everything," she spat. Cassie stared at her, her face pale. "And you finally made it obvious." The next morning, Cassie made a call to Dr. Lennox, requesting a private scan and checkup. She didn't feel safe anymore, not with Jordan's growing indifference, not with Vanessa prowling the house like a predator. When she returned from the appointment, her father Martin waited in the lobby, having sensed something was wrong. They rode the elevator in silence, and when the doors opened to the penthouse floor, what they found made Cassie's blood freeze. The living room had been rearranged, Vanessa's things scattered across multiple rooms, and several of Cassie's personal belongings, photos, journals, heirlooms, were gone. "She's replacing you," Martin whispered, jaw clenched. Cassie nodded slowly, but there was no panic in her this time, only focus. That night, after Martin left, she confronted Vanessa alone. Voices rose. Emotions spilled. Jordan walked in as they argued, but before Cassie could speak, Vanessa screamed and accused her of physical assault. Jordan grabbed Cassie by the arm and shouted, "Enough. Stop ruining everything." And that's when Cassie snapped. The penthouse echoed with tension as Cassie stood firm near the staircase, her voice shaking but resolute. "I've tolerated everything, your lies, your betrayal, her invasion, but I won't let you question my sanity, Jordan," she said, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. Jordan, still reeling from Vanessa's dramatic shrieks and manufactured tears, barked back, "You've been unstable for weeks, Cassie. You twist everything and act like the victim." Vanessa, standing just a few feet above on the staircase landing, folded her arms, watching the exchange with a glint of triumph. Cassie turned toward her. "You can have the man," she said quietly, "but you'll never have what's growing inside of me." That one sentence sent Vanessa into a rage. She lunged down the staircase, pointing and screaming. "You think you're untouchable? You think you're better than me?" As Cassie backed up to avoid the flailing hand, Vanessa's shove came swift, violent, and cold. Cassie tumbled down the stairs. Time warped as Cassie's body hit the steps, her scream catching in her throat as her world twisted in slow motion. Jordan shouted her name, but it was too late. The thud of her body crashing against the polished wood echoed like thunder. Her head hit the bottom step, and she collapsed in a heap, motionless, blood beginning to stain her blouse. Vanessa immediately let out a shriek and ran down, now hysterical. "Oh my God! Cassie! I didn't mean to, she slipped, I swear, she slipped." Jordan pushed her aside, rushing to Cassie's side, his hands trembling as he checked for a pulse. "Cassie! Wake up, come on!" Her eyes fluttered weakly, barely open, her hand twitching toward her abdomen. She couldn't speak, but the pain etched across her face said everything. Jordan called emergency services, yelling into the phone, voice cracking. As sirens blared in the distance, Vanessa curled up on the stairs, sobbing, but only when someone was watching. At the hospital, chaos reigned. Doctors rushed Cassie into emergency care while Jordan sat in the hallway, blood on his sleeves, unable to stop replaying the moment. Heather arrived minutes later after receiving Martin's frantic call and found Jordan staring blankly at the floor. "You did this," she hissed, her voice a dagger. "You let her in, and she nearly killed your wife and child." Jordan opened his mouth to protest, but the weight of guilt silenced him. Meanwhile, Vanessa, at home, was rehearsing a new version of the story for the police. Cassie was emotional. She slipped. "I tried to help." But beneath her crocodile tears was a chilling calm. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, Cassie out of the way. Or so she thought. Because as doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Cassie, a tiny heartbeat flickered on the monitor, faint but strong. And even as Cassie faded into unconsciousness, her babies, were still fighting to survive. The hospital room buzzed with quiet urgency as Cassie lay unconscious, tubes snaking from her arms, heart monitor pulsing steadily but faint. Dr. Phoebe Lennox, summoned immediately after the trauma call, hovered over her with silent desperation. The fall had been brutal, deep bruises, a mild concussion, and internal bleeding, but by some divine mercy, both babies were still alive. Their heartbeats flickered on the ultrasound, fighting with the strength of something greater than flesh. Heather, sitting just outside, refused to leave the hallway. She hadn't spoken to Jordan since she arrived, hadn't even looked at Vanessa, who'd shown up crying and giving statements to police like a misunderstood heroine. But Heather knew the truth. She'd watched this betrayal unfold piece by piece. And now, as Cassie fought for her life, Heather made herself a vow: Cassie would not wake up to the same nightmare again. She would wake up free, and she would not face this storm alone. When Vincent Hale walked into the hospital 2 hours later, it was without fanfare. He hadn't been told by his mother or brother. He had found out through one of his private corporate contacts who flagged unusual insurance activity at the HaleTech Premium facility. The moment he saw Heather's swollen eyes and Jordan's hunched figure, he pieced the rest together. Heather pulled him aside and told him everything: Vanessa's presence, the fight, the push. Vincent didn't flinch. He nodded, jaw tightening, and said 3 words that changed everything: get her out. That night, Vincent used a personal favor from a longtime friend and transferred Cassie, under alias name and discreet emergency orders, to a private wellness clinic outside Bellevue. Only Heather, Dr. Lennox, and 2 nurses knew. Cassie was whisked away under the cover of night, her chart marked restricted access. When Jordan returned the next morning, demanding to see his wife, he was told she had been moved for advanced trauma care. But no one could tell him where. Not even Vanessa. Cassie regained consciousness 2 days later in a room filled with sunlight and silence. Her first instinct was to reach for her belly, and when she felt the slow, rhythmic flutter of life still present, tears spilled from her eyes. Heather sat beside her, exhausted but smiling. "You're safe now. The babies are okay. And they don't know where you are." Cassie tried to speak but couldn't. Her throat was dry, her body heavy, but her mind raced. Vanessa had pushed her. Jordan had shouted at her while she lay bleeding. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was betrayed at her most vulnerable. Heather explained the plan, how Vincent had stepped in, how the world thought she was gone. For now, that illusion was her shield. Cassie would stay hidden, heal, and protect her children in peace. But there was something else blooming in her chest: not fear, not vengeance. Purpose. Pure and sharpened. Because when she did return, she would not return quietly. Weeks passed like whispers inside the serene walls of the private facility. Cassie spent her days recovering slowly, her nights tangled in dreams both terrifying and prophetic. Dr. Lennox visited regularly, monitoring the fragile yet persistent lives inside her womb. Against all odds, the twins continued to grow, tiny miracles birthed in violence, now thriving in sanctuary. Heather stayed close, reading to her, bringing her updates about the outside world without ever uttering Jordan or Vanessa's names. Vincent, now Cassie's unlikely guardian, began visiting quietly in the evenings. He brought her soothing teas, helped install a white noise machine for restful sleep, and even constructed a makeshift nursery in the adjoining suite. His kindness was deliberate, never forced. Though he never directly apologized for his family, his actions said what words couldn't. Cassie, once a woman torn by betrayal, now began to feel something unfamiliar: peace. And yet, she knew that peace, like pregnancy, had a timeline. A reckoning always follows birth. 2 months later, Cassie woke with intense pressure in her abdomen. The pain was sharp, unrelenting, and unlike any she had felt. Alarms went off, nurses rushed in, and Dr. Lennox's voice remained the calm anchor amid the chaos. "It's time," she said with conviction. Cassie, breathless and trembling, was wheeled into a sterile delivery suite, her thoughts only of survival, for her, and for the 2 lives she'd been fighting so hard to protect. Hours blurred into moments, and with one final cry, she heard it, a sound she thought she might never hear. A baby's wail. Then another. 2 piercing cries, twin echoes of life defying every odd stacked against them. You have a son and a daughter, Dr. Lennox beamed, tears welling. Noah and Naomi, Cassie whispered, naming them the very name she had written in her journal before the fall. In that moment, as they were placed against her chest, Cassie didn't just feel like a survivor, she felt like a mother reborn. Back in the city, the Hale penthouse glowed with artificial joy. Vanessa had convinced Jordan to announce their engagement, painting it as a fresh start after Cassie's tragic disappearance. Vanessa made rounds on social media, all crocodile tears and curated vulnerability, while Jordan remained somber, haunted. What he didn't know was that Heather, acting as an anonymous whistleblower, had begun releasing photos of him and Vanessa at the resort to industry blogs. The narrative shifted. Public sympathy dwindled. Whispers of scandal began circulating in investor circles. Still, Vanessa pressed forward, controlling the press, scheduling wedding shoots, manipulating Jordan with promises of legacy and rebirth. But her confidence was built on one assumption, that Cassie was gone. Dead, defeated, erased. She had no idea that Cassie, now holding her healthy twins in a quiet recovery room, was watching the headlines too, silently, patiently. Because soon, the woman they tried to destroy would rise with more than her name. She'd rise with heirs. And with truth. Vanessa stood on the marble balcony of the Hale penthouse, clutching her designer passport wallet in one hand and a flute of champagne in the other. She had just secured an exclusive invite to Brazil's elite Luxe Fashion Expo, where the most powerful buyers and designers from 5 continents would gather to showcase opulence, influence, and future trends. To her, it wasn't just a business trip, it was her coronation. Her photos with Jordan had gone viral. Public sympathy around Cassie's disappearance had died down. And most importantly, Jordan had finally proposed, albeit without much excitement. She wore the ring like a trophy, waving it in front of mirrors and cameras as if daring the universe to deny her throne. The Hale empire, the penthouse, the headlines, she had them all. She booked a private jet with a luxury charter service, insisting on exclusivity and flair. As she blew a kiss into the mirror before leaving, she whispered, "Brazil, meet your queen." Hours later, the jet lifted off from Seattle's private airfield under clear skies and high confidence. Vanessa reclined with an eye mask and lavender oil, sipping imported spring water and imagining herself in custom gowns before South American royalty. She didn't notice the turbulence at first, just a gentle rocking, a flicker in the cabin lights. But then the shaking intensified. Fast. A shrill beep sounded in the cockpit, followed by the captain's voice, strained but professional. "We're experiencing an electrical malfunction. Please brace for emergency descent." Panic erupted. Vanessa gripped her seat's armrests, mascara-stained tears smudging the edge of her eye mask. "No, no, no, this isn't happening," she gasped. She opened her phone and tried to dial Jordan, but there was no signal. No comfort. Just the rapid descent, the ocean rising fast beneath them. The last thing she heard before the world went dark was the deafening crack of metal giving way, and a final, hollow scream. The news broke the next morning. Private jet crashes off coast of Brazil, all passengers presumed dead. The headlines were everywhere. Photos of Vanessa in designer outfits were plastered across screens, some showing her boarding the plane, others of her holding Jordan's hand at public events. Jordan read the reports in stunned silence. His phone slipped from his hand. He didn't cry, he didn't move for hours. He just sat on the floor of his office, staring into nothingness. Vincent arrived later, tried to console him, but Jordan pushed everyone away. For days, the media speculated, was it mechanical failure? Pilot error? Karma? The public, once skeptical of Vanessa, now romanticized her tragedy. But amid the condolences and shock, Jordan began to unravel. In her absence, he realized how deep he'd fallen, not in love, but into deception. And while the world mourned Vanessa Cruz, Jordan Hale sat in a mansion full of shadows, unaware that the one woman who had every reason to vanish was not only alive, but watching. Cassie stood near the window of her recovery suite, holding Noah in one arm and Naomi resting gently in a soft bassinet beside her. The silence that once accompanied her pain was now filled with the gentle murmurs of her newborns, their breathing, their hiccups, their hungry cries. Life had returned to her not in grand gestures, but in these tiny, sacred movements. But with Vanessa gone, the world had shifted once again. She knew that Jordan would spiral. Not because he had lost someone he loved, but because his manipulation, his denial, and his silence had nowhere left to hide. Heather sat across the room folding onesies when Cassie finally said it aloud, "He needs to know. Not for me, but for them." Heather's face tensed. "You're sure?" Cassie nodded. "I'm not seeking reconciliation. I'm seeking accountability. I want him to see the lives he almost destroyed." That night, Cassie wrote a letter. It wasn't full of bitterness. Just truth. The envelope was hand-delivered by Vincent the following day. It bore no return address, only Jordan's name and Cassie's graceful script. When he opened it in his study, his hands trembled. Inside was a photograph of two perfect, sleeping infants swaddled in ivory cloth. Beneath it, her note read, "Their names are Noah and Naomi. They survived. I survived. We are not coming back. But you will never forget what your silence nearly cost." Jordan sat stunned for a long moment. His mind ricocheted between confusion and anguish. He had thought Cassie was gone forever, lost in grief or worse. That letter shattered the illusion. He ran to his safe, tearing through files to find the hospital report again, but he found nothing that mentioned her transfer. Heather had covered her tracks, and Vincent had kept silent. The empire that had been built on dominance now seemed made of glass, and each word in her letter became a crack in its foundation. He drove to Vincent's office and barged in without knocking. "Where is she?" he barked, but Vincent didn't flinch. He calmly stood, closed the door, and responded, "She's safe. That's all you need to know." Jordan's rage flared. "They're my children." Vincent cut him off with a sharp glare. "They're her children. And you don't get to demand access after turning your back when she needed you the most." The weight of those words broke Jordan more than the crash or the scandals. He staggered back into the hall, the photo still clenched in his hand. That night, he sat alone in his room, staring at the image until dawn. He thought of Cassie's warmth, her honesty, her strength, qualities he had traded for vanity and lies. For the first time in years, he wept not from pride or pain, but from shame. And somewhere in a quiet corner of Bellevue, Cassie held her babies close, knowing that hearing the truth would hurt more than any silence ever could. Jordan Hale sat in the sterile office of Dr. Kellerman, a world-renowned immunologist, as if the walls themselves were caving in. What began as unexplained fatigue and joint stiffness weeks earlier had worsened, nosebleeds, weight loss, chest tightness. He assumed it was stress, grief, or karma clawing through his system. But nothing could have prepared him for the truth. The doctor looked at him with that familiar expression that only precedes devastation. "You have a rare autoimmune disease, systemic polyarteritis nodosa," he said quietly. "It's degenerative, aggressive, and unfortunately, incurable." Jordan blinked. "How long do I have?" he asked. The silence that followed was louder than any words. The empire he built, the penthouse he once shared, the crown he wore, it all felt like ash now. For the first time in his adult life, Jordan faced something he couldn't bribe, outthink, or overpower. Mortality didn't care about legacies. It cared only that he had wasted too much time becoming someone Cassie wouldn't recognize. Meanwhile, Cassie continued rebuilding her life not with vengeance, but with purpose. She focused on the twins, Noah with his sleepy eyes and Naomi with her feisty spirit. She documented every milestone, their first giggle, their first stretch, the way their hands instinctively reached for each other when placed apart. Heather remained her anchor, while Vincent quietly handled every legal matter on her behalf, from securing full guardianship over Jordan's estate shares allocated to her by marriage, to ensuring privacy protections remained airtight. Cassie never asked Jordan for anything, not visitation, not acknowledgement, not forgiveness. She had long accepted that some wounds didn't need reconciliation to heal. And yet, she didn't hate him. She pitied him. The man who once had everything had traded love for lies, truth for convenience. And now, she watched from a distance as rumors about his health trickled into the media, sparking panic in boardrooms and whispers in social circles. Jordan's name still held power, but his soul, once untouchable, was unraveling. The diagnosis sobered Jordan, but it was the silence from Cassie that haunted him most. He sent letters, one to Heather, one to Vincent, begging to see the children. Just once, he wrote. Just to tell them I exist. I don't want them to grow up without knowing who I am, even if I don't deserve to be remembered kindly. Cassie read the letter, holding it for days before responding. She finally agreed, to a controlled, supervised meeting, short and private. You can see them, she wrote. But you don't get to call yourself father just because your blood runs in their veins. You earned that title. And you surrendered it. Jordan wept when he read it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He prepared himself, not with grand speeches or delusional dreams of reconciliation, but simply to stand before the children he never deserved, and maybe, just maybe, leave them with a different kind of legacy, the truth. Victoria Hale sat at her polished mahogany desk, her diamond-studded fountain pen gliding across stock transfer documents with surgical precision. But even her pristine signature couldn't erase the mess unraveling around her. Hale Tech's board was panicking, rumors of Jordan's illness were no longer rumors, and key investors were jumping ship. Just speculation, Victoria hissed to one of her legal advisors. Control the narrative. But she had underestimated the one variable she could never fully erase, Cassie. The girl she once deemed unworthy had become the centerpiece of a quiet storm. Photos of Cassie with the twins had surfaced anonymously online, sparking renewed media interest. Speculation turned into public sympathy, and Hale Tech's public image teetered. To make matters worse, Vincent had submitted a sealed report to the board, one that included audio recordings and internal memos revealing Victoria's secret alliance with Vanessa, along with proof of hush payments and media manipulation. The board demanded answers. And for the first time, Victoria was cornered. Vincent confronted her in the same boardroom where his father once sat, this time with unwavering calm. You weaponized grief, Mother, he said. You turned your son into a pawn and destroyed the only good thing that ever happened to this family. Victoria tried to remain defiant, but her voice faltered. I did what was necessary for the legacy. Vincent scoffed. You did what was necessary for your ego. He handed her a letter, Cassie's petition for full guardianship over Jordan's estate and all assets tied to her name and the twins. Legally, she had every right. Emotionally, it was poetic justice. Let her take it, Vincent told her. She earned what none of us ever could, grace in the face of betrayal. The board voted the next morning to remove Victoria from all active leadership. She was offered a ceremonial title, stripped of influence. As she exited the building, paparazzi swarmed her. For the first time in decades, she had nothing to say. Cassie sat in a quiet park hours later, holding Naomi while Noah slept soundly in his stroller. Vincent joined her on a bench, watching birds flutter near a fountain. She's out, he said simply. Cassie didn't smile. She didn't gloat. I didn't do it for revenge, she replied softly. I did it so my children wouldn't have to grow up in the shadow of a lie. Vincent admired her restraint, how she had endured everything, yet carried herself with grace that royalty would envy. He handed her a sealed envelope, Jordan's health proxy and final will, naming her the executor of his estate. He's ready, Vincent said. To see them. Cassie looked down at Naomi, her tiny fingers wrapped around her thumb. Then we'll go, she whispered. But not for him, for them. She would give her children the right to know the truth. But it would be on her terms, not as a grieving ex-wife, but as the woman who rose from ashes and chose to carry light. The room smelled of antiseptic and wilted lilies. Jordan Hale, once a towering emblem of wealth and pride, now lay gaunt and pale in a reclining bed, machines softly beeping around him. His eyes, once piercing and commanding, were tired hollows framed by shadows. When the door opened and Cassie stepped in holding Noah, followed by Heather carrying Naomi, time stood still. Jordan's hands trembled as he struggled to sit up. Cassie moved without a word, adjusting his pillows, placing Noah into his arms. The baby squirmed, then settled, resting against a chest that once carried arrogance, now filled with sorrow. Tears slipped down Jordan's cheeks as he stared into his son's face. "I'm sorry," he choked. "For not being there. For everything." Naomi let out a soft cry and Cassie moved to soothe her, her calm presence saying what words couldn't. Forgiveness wasn't spoken that day, it was simply allowed to exist for a few sacred hours. The twins, too young to understand, cooed and clutched at Jordan's fingers, their innocence a sharp contrast to the weight of the moment. Jordan watched Cassie as she bounced Naomi gently, her composure a mix of dignity and grace. "You look like a queen," he whispered. Cassie didn't respond with flattery, just a soft, bittersweet smile. "I became one when you left," she replied gently. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth. Vincent entered the room briefly to check on them, offering Jordan a quiet nod before exiting. Time moved gently, like waves receding from shore. Before leaving, Cassie placed a sealed envelope in Jordan's hand. "These are letters I wrote for the children, on birthdays, for milestones. In case you didn't make it," she said. Jordan clutched them like gold. "They'll know you," she added, voice steady. "They'll know everything." As she stepped toward the door, Jordan called after her weakly, "Thank you for letting me see what I threw away." She paused, nodded once, and walked away. Jordan died 3 nights later, just before sunrise. Vincent was by his side, holding his brother's hand as the machine slowed, then stilled. No grand speeches. No dramatic finish. Just silence and peace. At the private memorial, the public learned what Cassie had long kept quiet, that she was his legal wife to the end, that the Hale Empire was now in her name, passed down to Noah and Naomi Hale. Reporters scrambled to understand the timeline, but the family released no statements. There was nothing left to explain. At the gravesite, Cassie stood in a black dress, holding the twins beside her father Martin, with Heather and Vincent nearby. The crowd watched her, expecting tears, maybe a breakdown, but she only placed a white rose on Jordan's casket and whispered, "You were my breaking. But not my ending." As the wind stirred around her, Cassie turned, walking away not as a victim, but as a woman who had lived, loved, lost, and risen. 1 year later, the skyline of Seattle stretched wide under a lavender sky as Cassie Hale-White stood in the glass-wrapped conference room of Nona Logistics, the company she founded in honor of her twins, Noah and Naomi. The company didn't just thrive, it transformed the freight industry with safer policies for female drivers, eco-conscious transport, and employee-first leadership. She wasn't just a name on the wall, she was the heartbeat of a vision born from survival. In the corner of the room, Heather laughed with Martin while Naomi toddled around in tiny brown boots, and Noah clutched his favorite truck. Vincent arrived moments later, placing a quiet bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite, on her desk. "Board meeting in 10, CEO, he teased. She smiled, remembering the girl who once stared at spreadsheets in a rented apartment, believing all she needed was love. But love without respect had failed her. Now, she had both, and it radiated in every step she took. The public still buzzed about the Cassie Hale story, but she had long stopped correcting headlines. Let them speculate. Let them romanticize. She didn't owe the world a narrative, it had taken enough already. What mattered were the small things, Naomi's giggle when she saw birds, Noah's love for puzzles, the way Vincent stayed close but never overstepped. She hadn't remarried, and she wasn't rushing to. Healing wasn't a race, it was a deliberate walk through fire and flowers. The estate Jordan left behind was managed strictly for the twins, with every decision rooted in protection, not power. Occasionally, Cassie would catch her reflection, strong shoulders, clear eyes, and a woman who had earned her peace. She no longer flinched at memories. She no longer wondered why me. She had faced death, betrayal, and erasure, and built something luminous from the ashes. Her name was no longer swallowed by someone else's legacy. She had become her own foundation, her own future. That afternoon, she walked the twins to the edge of Green Lake, where wind rustled through evergreens and families picnicked nearby. Naomi threw breadcrumbs at ducks while Noah stacked pebbles into a tower. Cassie sat on a blanket, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the sun ripple on the water. Martin sat beside her, quietly holding her hand. "You did it," he said. "You gave them a better life." She looked at her children, then up at the horizon. "We're just getting started," she whispered. Her phone buzzed with a new contract offer and a message from Vincent saying, "The world isn't ready for what's next." She smiled, placing the phone down and focusing instead on the present, on laughter, on wind, on the stillness that comes after a storm finally passes. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was a whole new book. And as the sun began to set, Cassie stood tall. Not broken. Not bruised. But reborn. The end.